So this audio should guide you through the PowerPoint presentation from the lecture on studying music disciplines and approaches. It's meant as a kind of study aid to accompany your notes. It's not meant as the only sole means of kind of refreshing your memory of the class. So I would advise using as many methods as possible for kind of recapping the issues that we've discussed. So the first thing we discussed in class was the idea of a text. Now, a text is anything that can be read. Many of you said that your understanding of a text was quite the literal understanding of it was text messages, text in print, that type of thing. But for our definition, we need it to mean something slightly broader, or certainly something that's more useful to music. So yes, generally a text is anything that can be read, and obviously we can read music. A text of any kind requires certain skills or knowledge in order to be read or understood. A collective branch of knowledge is known as a discipline. So we have to remember that a text, it can be music, it can be the score, it can be an audio track, it can be an event, it can be you can read what's going on at an event, you can read a concert, you can read crowd response, those types of things. So the text is meant in the broadest sense possible here. So disciplinary approaches to the study of music. So in class we kind of looked at the idea of musicology and the history of musicology as a very, very general term for the study of music. So music here I kind of flippantly defined as the social, anti-social practice of organised or disorganised sound. I mean, it's just a very ambiguous kind of, more than anything to make the point it's very difficult to define music, but that's not really our goal here. Ology, the study of a branch of knowledge. So regardless of how we define music, the ology part means that we're studying it, or we're addressing a branch of knowledge that pertains to it. So musicology, it initially focused on the study of Western art or classical composers. Now, Western art's a better term, as classical, as many of you know, is a term that's assigned to a particular period in Western art music. So I think as a whole, it's better to address classical music as Western art music, because of course there are other kind of Indian art musics, etc., etc. So I think we'll go with Western art music for what many have perhaps previously defined as classical. So the text in this case, in early musicology, was of course the score. What was being analysed with early musicology was the composer's methods and intentions. Now this was of use to anyone who was interested in perhaps composing the music or playing the music, but it wasn't much use to anyone beyond that. So musicology had to be addressed later to kind of be more all-encompassing, to try and address the things that the other elements of music that really matter. So in class, remember we went through and we in looking at the score, we thought about what was being neglected. So it might be worth kind of recapping that again. I just think what can be learned from looking at the score? Who are we neglecting? What sonic elements of the music are we leaving out? And what extra musical factors are we neglecting? So I've got some notes here on responses some of you gave. So from the score we can learn quite a lot about harmony. We can learn a lot about melody. We can learn some things about instrumentation. We can learn things about time signature. We can learn keys, things like that. So anything that we can learn quite a lot about the music in terms of if we were trying to replicate it in terms of composition. But who are we neglecting? So in addressing the score, we're only really thinking about the composer. In terms of performance, certainly we're only really thinking about the composer. We're not really thinking about who's actually going to be playing the music. So we're not really thinking about the guitarist that's going to be performing this particular piece, or the violin player, because everyone plays differently, as we all know. What sonic elements of the music are we leaving out? So we're obviously leaving out things like timbre. Of course, there's implied timbre of a violin, but violin players will all agree that violins all sound different. Guitar players are the same. It doesn't say, unless it says a 1977 Telecaster, then we're not going to know quite that much about tone, or timbre is a better word. What extra musical factors are we neglecting? So we're neglecting things like response, circumstances of composition. There are lots of answers for this, so I really advise you sit down and have a think about this again, just these types of issues. So musicology now, I've skipped quite a few events in the history of musicology, but for our purposes we're better just arriving at the present quite quickly. So musicology has become a multi-dimensional academic discipline. By that I mean it has so many areas of study. You know, we've started to encompass things like culture and you know, sonic elements, art, record productions become quite a new thing. So the methods of musicologists are dependent entirely on the text being studied. So if your text is, say, a concert, an event, your text won't be the same as if you're studying composition. So it's musicology now is totally dependent on what's being studied, and there's so many ways to study music that it's had to become inter and multidisciplinary. So, looking back to this idea of branches of knowledge or disciplines, though the older interpretation of the term musicology still exists, the discipline can now draw on many others. So, musicology as a kind of very, very global concept still does exist. You can still do a master's in musicology, but it will encompass far more than score analysis now. So, some examples of other disciplines that are kind of finding their way into the body of musicology are ethnomusicology, kind of study of history of music, sociology, cultural studies is quite a prevalent force in popular music studies, certainly. Psychology, education, composition studies, semiotics, the sort of meaning of music, the meaning of symbols and signs, relation of signifier to signified. I suggest Googling that because I'm not going to be able to sum up semiotics in a few sentences here. Anthropology, which I suppose has influenced the development of ethnomusicology, but it's still related here. Scottish studies is interesting, kind of what it means in terms of national identity and things in this country. Of course, there'll be examples in other countries, and but I just thought I would draw out the idea of Scottish studies because I certainly know that they deal with music. And it's where we are. Philosophy, of course, philosophy is included in the study of music, and literature studies. So there are people who address, for instance, song texts, lyrics as literature, and try and position these songs within kind of literature history, the history of poetry or whatever. So suitability of method to text. So we have to think about methodology now. So some of you will have an idea of the types of things you might like to study and what you're going to look at in your dissertations and your research projects. So what you will have to think about quite seriously is how to look at this text. So whether your text is a Radiohead album or your text is educational methods for guitar teaching, or whatever your text is, you have to think about what methodology you're going to use. What is it you're studying? What is your text? And what knowledge do you need? So those are things you really need to start thinking about this week. So questions, of course this makes more sense in the context of a class, but what I would do now is sit down for 5 minutes and just think about the things we've discussed here, and I've kind of recapped very, very quickly through this, but just sit and give yourself some time to think about it and write down any questions you might have, so that when you come to class you're kind of empowered with a sense of what you know and what you don't know. So, texts, what we need to draw from this. What interests you about music? I need you to, this week and next week, identify individually a particular text for study. I need you to try and make this as specific as you can, and really, really do try and focus on this idea of what interests you about music. Because you're going to have to do this for a full year, it needs to be something that's going to kind of grab your attention and kind of inspire you to keep moving forward with it. So if you're interested in Muse, try and write a paper on Muse. If you're interested in adult education and music, try and, when you get the point here. So really, really think about over the next week or two what interests you about music. Why are you studying music? So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in class.